Welcome back to Derry Public Radio. Reporting from the basement of the Derry Civic Center, this is CM Alexander with the news. Horror icon Mick Garris was spotted hosting a dinner with fellow masters of horror while in Derry over the weekend. Our invites must have been lost in the mail, but an eyewitness claims it would have been cooler if we were there. It was me. I was the eyewitness. You are listening to Derry Public Radio. This is Derry Public Radio.
Welcome back to Derry Public Radio, a bi-weekly Stephen King book club podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Joshua Kahn, alongside CM Alexander.
Hello, everyone.
And Benjamin Graham.
Hey, constant readers.
And today is a very special episode. I know you're like, it's not Sunday, but I'm getting an episode. Well, that's because we are going to be talking about The Master of Horror, the official biography of Mick Garris, written by Abby Bernstein. We were gifted advance copies from ATB Publishing, and we thought it'd be fun to sit around and talk about it. And we have CM leading our discussion today. So CM, take it away.
Thanks, Josh. And actually, you did a review of the book on our website, constantreaders.org, which is what we were actually asked to do. Yeah. But we enjoyed it so much that we're like, we want to talk about this as a bonus episodes and give it to our listeners. So this is the first work of Abby's that I've read, but I think it's pretty clear from the start that the motivation for her book is to bring to light a horror master who's perhaps not the household name that he should be, despite his astounding resume and how he has influenced all of our watching lives, whether or not
No kidding.
we realize it.
For sure. I assumed because CM, you and Devin are, I think, the biggest well-rounded horror heads.
Thanks.
That you guys are always the one that are like, oh yeah, it's that guy from some movie I've never even heard of. So I assume you knew Mick Garris before
Right, yeah.
we were contacted. I had heard the name, but I hadn't put the name to anything. The fact that this guy wrote Hocus Pocus is insane.
That's so... It blew my mind. That was the first thing out of the gate that I was like, no way. I was obsessed with that movie.
We were talking to our friends, just about the book and his career as we were reading this. And one of our friends is like, does he know that he's responsible for giving young boys all over boners? Of course, I'm referring to the Sarah Jessica Parker song part. I was like, hey man, young girls too.
I did a full disclosure due to our advanced copies being digital copies and technical problems. I didn't read the book, but I did go on a bit of a Mick Garris deep dive. Hocus Pocus holds the fuck up.
Yeah, it does.
Oh,
and also makes me very sad because I will never get to smooch 90s Sarah Jessica Parker.
I cannot wait till we get to talk about Critters too. But
oh my lord.
For now, I want to give a bit of history that the biography also covers, but some stuff that really stood out to me, and one of the things that has drawn me to Mick Garris's career. And we've talked about him briefly on our podcast because, of course, he did the original Stand miniseries. And we've also mentioned, either in a show proper or on our Patreon exclusive show, The Club, that Mick Garris is the organizer of the Masters of Horror anthology series. And so I want to describe what this is in a little more detail than we've gone into in the past for some listeners who may not be familiar. Masters of Horror was an anthology TV series of 1-hour movies that started off as Mick Garris inviting his friends to dinner. And two important things were at play for this dinner. One, those friends happened to be John Carpenter, Larry Cohen, Don Coscarelli, Joe Dante, Guillermo del Toro, Stuart Gordon, Toby Hooper, John Landis, and Bill Malone, which naturally led to the second important thing. All of those like-minded friends inevitably had a fantastic time talking about their shared interest, of course, horror. And they continued to get together, and eventually Mick Garris turned this into a more formal thing, and he created and produced the series. And so most of the episodes are written and directed by the original group of Masters of Horror, but they invited many other people, over the course of the series to participate and have episodes. And I've seen a few of them and talked about one on our show, Imprint, of which destroyed my psyche so badly. After watching that, I burst into tears without knowing I was going to cry. Have you ever had surprise cry? It's weird. Usually, it's coming, like it's building up, and it hit me like a freight train. I was so emotional that the only thing that I could do was to just let it go and sob for like 10 minutes. In my
That's huge.
Well, but in my defense, Mick Garris, this episode was shelved because of the content, and he's quoted as saying that it is the most disturbing film I've ever seen. And yes, I second that. It definitely is.
It's Takesha, or I'm gonna butcher this name, Takesha Miike, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who did Ichi the Killer?
Oh,
And yeah, so his stuff is Audition,
Yeah.
which is currently actually queued up at home. I'm going home to watch that movie. And it's not just that episode.
No.
The show as a whole is so bleak and like violent. And there's an episode directed by Toby Hooper that was so just like nihilistic and a huge bummer that I couldn't get through the whole episode. It was just like so much. It's so much.
There's a reason for that, which our listeners, I'm not going to go into too great a detail, but there's a whole gigantic chapter specifically about all of these episodes. And in a nutshell, these directors, like the purpose of this was, we're going to do what we want. We're going to do our vision and make it happen and not have anybody any studio interfering. And that you just make people cry from despair when you do that, apparently. But in addition to breaking my heart, the series won Saturn, Emmy, and Satellite Awards for Best Television Presentation, DVD Release, and Outstanding Music Composition, and Main Title Theme Music, and Best DVD Extra. So it was a big deal, and people loved it.
I remember when they were released on DVD at first, they were released like one at a time, which was very strange. I remember being very frustrated in high school because I wanted to watch them so bad, but I was like, I have to buy like 10 different DVDs to watch this series.
And the Blu-rays are not easy to get a hold of, not super cheap. There's like a
streaming
special
for free on
edition
Tubi,
I know,
everyone.
Really?
Yeah.
I want it though. You know how I am. Okay, and then finally, before we dive into more of the actual book, Mick Garris is also known for directing other King work, including Sleepwalkers, Bag of Bones. He was the co-screenwriter and executive producer of, as we said, we didn't say this, but I think it's clear, the best Halloween movie alongside Halloween 3, Hocus Pocus. And he wrote Critters 2, among many other things, including Psycho 4. So if you want to know Mick Garris better and familiarize yourself with his work, if you're not already, you can listen to his podcast, The Postmortem with Mick Garris. Okay, so let's get to it.
Before we start,
Let's
having
not get to it.
not read the book, it's how much detail does the book get into in that first dinner with all of the masters of horror getting together?
All the detail.
Yeah, I can't imagine being. Have you ever had the thought experiment like, okay, you can have a dinner party with 5 celebrities, living or dead. Who do you pick? That dinner party is a hell of a list.
Right.
Oh, Alexander Skarsgård, Bill Skarsgård.
Wait, what? They were
Her
there?
list.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I get that.
That's my list of 5 people.
It made me want to just get on Mick Garris's dinner invitation list just sometime, just to have dinner with someone who had dinner with all those people. I just want to be adjacent to that dinner.
I want to watch through the window, but in a
In a supportive way.
Yeah.
Listeners, someone give us fan art of all of those directors having a wonderful Thanksgiving dinner. And the 3 of us dressed as like Dickensian waifs standing at the window, looking sadly in at them.
Oh, I would love that so much.
Well, before we talk about the dinner in the book, we start with Mick Garris's childhood, which it's very much what you expect of someone who loves horror. You've got this bright, talented, weird kid, didn't have a lot of friends, and like we say often, he grew up to be a really awesome person, by all accounts, like many horror lovers do. So let's talk about some things from his childhood that stood out in this section.
The first thing right away that made me realize I love this journey is finding out that he not only built a full-on graveyard in his backyard as a set for a movie he made when he was a kid, but he used to climb into the coffin he built to read. That's rad.
Oh my God, that sounds so relaxing.
I know!
I need a reading
A
coffin,
reading
guys.
coffin.
Most people want a nook. No, I want a coffin.
Jeez.
It's basically the bed version of a nook.
I really enjoyed the part about him interviewing Ray Bradbury when he was 16 years old. And
Wow.
his explanation that he got into interviewing, not for the journalistic side of things, but to get his questions answered, which I feel like that's how we do it on our podcast too.
Yeah.
Talking to people we admire and we want to ask them about their passions and just have that conversation with them. So that part really, really spoke to me. And also, nope, I'm not going to do it. I was going to be like, why we asked Mick Garris for one.
That part really spoke to me. Him talking about getting those questions answered. This, I will say, I've contacted Mick Garris after reading this just to say that I appreciated the opportunity. I was glad to read it, but that my big takeaway was it made me want to be a better interviewer because his passion is so palpable in it. And I think that this goes into what comes a little bit later when he talks about his band, the kind of all in this together mentality that his whole mindset since the beginning of his career has been, let's all work together to do the best thing we can do. And I think that's rad.
And I think that really ties in well to this sort of through note that Abby does a fantastic job of having all throughout all of this is that, and I can't remember if it was in the foreword or the author's note, but Mick Garris is described as being the sort of person who, like, all of his skeletons are on display in his house, like for people to admire and enjoy. They are not in his closet. They are through his horror work. And from what everyone says of him throughout this book, he appears to be, you know how sometimes you meet like your idols and you're like, shit, wish that hadn't happened. He seems like a safe person to meet and admire and support his work. And that's so nice right now to feel that safety.
It's so sad that is a huge thing that basic human kindness is like, wow, that rules. Can I say, if not to, toot our own horn, but if we were to be able to interview Mick Garris, what questions would you guys want to ask first?
Ooh, that's a good question. Oh, actually,
because you're completely right. Like, that is the way that we do this. Like, we're not in it to be taken seriously as interviewers. It's just like, oh, this guy made some rad movies, and he'll talk to us. Hell yeah.
Well, it's hard too. Like, hopefully our listeners don't mind this too terribly, but a lot of our interviews takes us like, and maybe I cut some of it out, but an actual recording takes us like 25 minutes before we're to more of the heart of our interview, because we're just chatting with the filmmakers about their projects and what they like just in general and what they don't like, and it's so much fun.
I can think of two questions. One is very short, the other one probably a much longer answer. One, I'm insanely curious, in his opinion, what's the best thing he has ever written but hasn't sold?
Ooh.
Because
holy shit, that's a great interview question for anyone.
Yeah, because he in one of his in the early chapters, I believe he talks about that he just writes when he feels like writing, and when he's done writing, he's done writing.
That's amazing.
And so I can't imagine the screenplays or things that are sitting around his house. And the other thing is actually we'll talk about a little bit in Sleepwalkers. He had that scene that he's got Stephen King, I believe, Toby Hooper and Clive Barker. I think it's those three in this one scene. It's a one-take cameo. And so I'm just curious if he ever thought in his whole career that he'd plant an Easter egg in a movie like that would make people freak out 20 years later. Because you watch that and you see these people show up, and that's so cool. I just wonder what that feels like.
Is it weird to just, because I assume this would be over Zoom, I'd hope, and there'd be video. Not that we'd record it, but we always like to do video so that we don't talk over each other. Is it weird to just Just sit and watch somebody talk.
Technically, we do that because only one of us is talking at a time here in the
Technically,
room.
That's what conversation is.
Well, I guess for my part of the interview, I just be a really good listener. No, I was already a fan of his work, but after reading through this biography, now I would probably be a little starstruck. It'd be like when I briefly met Stephen King for a book signing and I froze. I didn't cry. I thought I would cry.
I would have cried.
Yeah.
There's also been, they talk about the interviews with Mick Garris being in his office, and occasionally will reference the things that are just around his office. He has the grimoire from Hocus Pocus
Oh my
in his
lord.
room. And to my great pleasure, I am a huge fan of something that in the book he talks about that no one really has ever seen. Do you remember?
I wonder if this is the thing that I wanted to talk about for a million years and does relate to my question. Go on.
Is it Quicksilver Highway?
No.
Oh. So Quicksilver Highway was a TV movie on Fox that
Okay.
I learned in this book was actually a backdoor pilot for a series, which is cool as hell. But I remember I recorded it on VHS because I wasn't going to be home when it was on, so I made sure that I could watch it. And he adapted a Clive Barker story and a Stephen King story in this, and the Stephen King story was The Chattering Teeth. And so
nice.
they built a giant set of chattering teeth, and he has that in his office, and that makes me so happy.
You guys, we have to rob Mick Garris.
Oh my gosh.
I want that fucking grimoire. Anyway, my question is related to what he would have and souvenirs from his movie. Is I would want to ask him if he still has the fuzz bucket suit and if I can have it.
Fuzz Bucket is on Disney Plus.
I watched it. It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so crazy. It is 1000% worth it for the most Mick Garris, like the most. It's not a horror movie. It's a made-for-TV Disney movie from 1986, or 1984, about a little boy who has an imaginary friend named Fuzzbucket. Everyone thinks he's a weirdo, but then he sees Fuzzbucket, and he's imagine Alf as made by Guillermo del Toro. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrifying. But there's a scene near the beginning of the movie. Fuzzbucket is invisible for the beginning of the movie, and it's just this annoying little Disney kid talking to an empty room. And he's like, "Oh, Fuzzbucket, how'd you be invisible? Oh, we gotta get you fixed." Well, when he finally fixes Fuzzbucket and Fuzzbucket becomes visible again, it is a sequence of him fading in through a series of fades, but it goes from nothing to a horrifying skeleton. To a horrifying skeleton graphically filled with guts.
Oh my god.
And then finally, the horrible monster that is Fuzzbucket proper. It's amazing.
This book talks a lot about Fuzzbucket.
Oh, thank God.
If our
It's a whole
listeners,
chapter.
yeah, if our listeners are enticed by what Ben just described, they will enjoy that.
You
section of
have
this book.
to. You have to go watch
It does
Fuzzbucket.
involve screwing in a mailbox.
Screwing in a mailbox or screwing in a mailbox?
Excuse me. What now?
The scene where he's inside the mailbox trying to escape.
Yes.
I'm going to give away something in this chapter because it's my favorite thing. In the script, it just, because he escapes by unscrewing the screws. In the script, it just says screwing noises are heard. And the censors sent the script back and they're like, you can't have that. And he was like, what? What do you mean? Oh, you guys are disgusting. And I had to change it to unscrewing noises.
That's fantastic.
I set the book down and just laughed.
Can we talk about, well, so not forever, because this isn't going to be as impactful to you guys as it is to me, but as we continue through his work in the first parts of this book, his inspirations, and ultimately what got him where he is today, there's another section that I just freaking loved. And it was about his band. So in college, he was in a band and he was singing and writing music. And this book spoke to me because I'm in a band, and I don't know, it's hard to describe just how you feel like creating something like that. It's like our podcast, just that fulfilling sense of, I could do this forever. Like, I don't even want to stop to eat. I just want to do this thing that makes me happy. But what I love about this section, because it really ties into directing and just who it seems like he is as a person, what Abby is trying to convey to us. He's talking about how that experience shaped his work as a screenwriter and a director. Because they weren't just playing music and singing words. His intent seemed to have been to make music in more of a cinematic experience, something that the listener would feel and would visualize. And taking that in his career in film, his goal was to bring together a team of people who were the best at what they did and be like this conductor to create something that wasn't just adequate, but was actually special, which, like, I know, that sounds really simple, and most people want to create something special, but there are a lot of people that the content they're creating is something paycheck, not something special.
Right.
Or they're jumping on a bandwagon. They're like, oh, horror's in, I'm going to do a horror film. And you can tell when that happens because there's no heart and soul in it. And so even if the end result is kind of bad or like maybe a little too cheesy or too campy, you can still appreciate it, and you can still find something really awesome and passionate and good in it. And I think that is so horror, and it's like this guy embodies that part of horror because he's a goofy dude, which I think is very clear in a lot of his work
Absolutely.
too.
That is the one that there are two things from everything that I watched that I felt, okay, I get this guy. Like, I can point out his marks, and one is he's fucking funny. Like,
Yeah.
Yes.
even Fuzzbucket and like Hocus Pocus being Disney movies, they can be corny, but rewatching them, there are bits that are just fucking hilarious that I was shocked to find genuine laughs in these kids movies.
It's a difference between like phoning it in, which is intolerably bad, and a passionate failure. Like horror can walk that line like no other genre can. And not like any of those things were failures. Those are all fun and awesome.
Yeah.
But when someone has that passion, they can't make something truly bad.
That was the second thing that I think is Mick Garris's calling card is you can feel in every scene of everything that he has made that he is having the best time in the world.
Yeah.
And I would give anything in the world to have been able to be on the set of Critters 2. I cannot imagine how much fun that set was.
The Critters 2 chapter, I want to read it again. Just reading about all, because it goes into a lot of detail about all of the practical effects and the thought behind that one little thing that would, not just make it a cool effect and look really awesome, but make it kind of cool and funny. And just to read about that is really cool.
Are you talking about the critter ball?
Or the alien whose tits explode out of her shirt.
That shit is awesome.
The funniest thing in the world.
The splat critter, and then the staple from
Yes!
Oh my god,
magazine.
that was the other thing that I was like,
God.
Critters 2, having never watched Critters 1, watching Critters 2 is an experience, because I was like, why is there a dumb hick on this spaceship? What's going on? The fact that Critters 2 has the craziest visual gag that I've ever seen in a movie that should not work, but just the glee of the staple in the middle of this topless woman's stomach because an alien scanned her out of a Playboy should not work, and it does because it's just so fucking crazy.
When I watched those movies as a kid, so like my memory of them, I couldn't really pick apart which was which. All of my memories of Critters is the sequel.
Yeah, it's halfway through, I was texting someone, and they're like, what are you up to? I'm like, I'm watching Critters 2, Gremlins 2, the new batch, because it's just that level of bonkers.
Yeah, giving all the critters personalities and traits, yeah.
The scene where they go in to the burger factory, and the kid is like it's their leader, and it's just a slightly bigger critter. Hilarious.
He talks about in that chapter that his style that he's carried through several movies is Norman Rockwell Goes to Hell, and I cannot think of a better way to describe that.
So before we kind of wrap this up by talking about a couple more things, I just want to go through a little bit more of what our listeners can expect if they pick this up, and they definitely should. So there's some stuff about, post band, kind of how he got into the scene a little bit, the work he did. He did all these amazing interviews for the Z channel, and you can find those on his website, mickgarrisinterviews.com. There's also another part of this that gets true crimey.
Wait, what?
There's a little bit of murder in here too.
Wait, what?
Gonna have to read the book, everybody.
Oh man, this is exciting. I'm not gonna read any of the books from now on. I want you guys to just spring these things
created
on
a
me.
problem.
So the final thing in what I'm thinking of, the first couple hundred pages, the setup of his life and who he is. I sincerely love the story of how he met his wife, Cynthia. She watched all of his interviews. She really enjoyed what he's doing, and she spotted him at a restaurant one night. And it's after she spent the day working on a house, and she was just all like grimy and had paint on her. But there he was, and she thought, well, this guy seems approachable. I'm going to do it. And so they hit it off immediately, and the intent wasn't, I'm going to do it because look at that guy. It was just, that guy's cool. But they had chemistry. They very quickly started a relationship, moved in together. But my favorite part of this is that the author is interviewing Cynthia about how they met, and she's just talking about all the ways that Mick Garris impressed her and sort of how she fell for him. And she adds that he's the best sexual partner she's ever had.
Yeah.
And
Hey.
the author's like,
so
Mick did not want this included for modesty's sake. However, dude is erotic as fuck, so it stays.
Yeah, that's the author note there. Really, he's going to be really pleased when he hears us recap
Hell
all the
yeah.
show.
Fucking get it, Mick. That's how you write a fucking biography.
So one thing I wanted to ask you guys, as two individuals who are way more, like 1,000 times more experienced just being in the cinematic universe on an acting standpoint than I am. I'm a watcher.
Real unfortunate timing of I thought you were going to say, as two people who are much more erotic. Don't know where this episode is going.
Go on.
As two erotic fellows. Just curious.
Can we change the podcast name?
Two erotic fellows.
CM and two erotic fellows.
That's a Patreon exclusive.
That people have to pay us not to listen to.
I enjoyed the section a little later on when he's talking about working with actors and kind of learning their language, like understanding who needs direction, who wants direction, who doesn't. And it just seems like he's the style of director that makes everybody working with him feel comfortable. He talks a lot about getting intimidated by actors who really know their stuff too, but just that he seems like someone who knows what he's doing, who manages actors very well, and is like the most humble person about it.
He is everything they talk about his directing style. He is the dream director. He is the director you want on a project, because there are people who come in and strong arm my way is my way. Mm-hmm. There are people who, if studio gets involved, will just bow to what the studio says. Anytime it seems like Mick Garris has come up against these things, he has found a way to find the common ground with everybody, mm-hmm. to figure out what's best for this project. It doesn't matter what you think is best for you. What's best for the whole of all these people. We have tons of people, hundreds of people working on this project. Think about all them. And I think that's really great for a director who has so much power to take that stance and kind of fight for the little guy.
Yeah.
It's like Fuzzbucket says. Fuzzbucket, wee!
I couldn't have said it any better.
Exactly.
And you didn't.
I think it might be too late to get that quote put on the book jacket, but we'll try.
No.
I don't want to turn this into all about Stephen King, but we are a Stephen King podcast, so
people should expect it from us.
Yeah, of course. I would like to talk about his huge body of work on Stephen King projects.
Man, where to start?
I wish I had started my Mick Garris marathon a little earlier, because I avoided rewatching or watching any of the Stephen King adaptations of books we haven't covered yet, because I know we will.
Yeah.
And we'll get to it. But I have to say, it was a real struggle not to rewatch the made-for-TV Desperation.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it since it was released, but I remember watching that and thinking that, first of all, Ron Perlman as the cop villain
Yeah, he's so
is
great.
so perfect. And I remember loving the whole thing so much. I'm so excited to watch that.
Yeah.
I'm really excited for Bag of Bones.
Yeah.
It's crazy the number of King adaptations he has done.
I sat and watched. I specifically went out, and it took me a while to track it down, but I got a copy of the ABC Shining miniseries because, hot take listeners, it's the superior version of The Shining. Deal with it.
That was aggressive.
Oh, I get slammed so hard for talking about this. We got invited onto another podcast to talk about The Shining, and I spent most of the time talking about how the ABC series was better.
We're
And
on
Steven
King.
Weber's amazing.
We're on King's side
Yeah.
in this one.
The Shining, the movie, is something just that I kind of separate in my mind,
it
and I
really
enjoy
is.
it
Absolutely.
for its own merits. And yeah,
But rewatching that again, one made me remember how much I love Steven Weber's performance as Jack Torrance, because it's just, you actually care. You care about what Jack's going through, and it's so cool. And even though the hedge animals, the topiary animals moving, it does not get the upgrade because he actually talks about it in the book that the way they shot it, they would have to go in and do a bunch of extra work to upgrade those effects. But so some of that stuff doesn't age well, but as a whole, it's still perfect.
I mean, that came out in the mid 2000s,
Yeah.
early mid 2000s. So yeah, you have to figure made for TV stuff from the early pre mid 2000s.
sorry, we all just shared a look.
Yeah,
because
you two both looked at each other like, oh my lord.
I was just reminded of his comments about the hand of God.
I was just
Yes,
about to
go
say
for
that.
it.
Oh my god, I have to hear this.
Yeah.
What?
So I have the quote here in talking about the chapter on the stand is so awesome, and there's such great behind the scenes. He goes in depth on talking about a bunch of the actors and his experience with them. Highly recommend. I cannot recommend that chapter enough. But he said, quote, "The hand of God scene was embarrassing, and the visual effect was embarrassing." And I was like, yeah, I feel that. But there's another tidbit from the stand that I have to share with you, Ben, about Matt Frewer, Trash Can Man.
Hit me.
Which they interview, Matt Frewer pops up across
off,
this
Matt
book
Frewer.
so often, and I've never been so happy to hear from him all the time. They were in Vegas shooting some of that stuff. In that very late stage radiation burn, he went out on the strip in that makeup. No one gave him a second look because it's Vegas.
He got a lap dance in it.
They took him to a strip club.
The stripper is just like, all right.
That's amazing.
So
She probably
good.
still tells that story like, I gave this dying man a lap
What's
dance.
sad is probably not.
Oh, yeah, that's true. It is Vegas. It's where
yeah.
dreams go to die.
That's probably was just a Tuesday for that lady.
Oh, also, we got real close. We could have had a Mick Garris directed Rose Red.
I did actually. I read that on IMDb.
Oh yeah,
And that
Yeah.
would have been. I would have loved
Man,
to
on
see
another
it.
level of the tower, we do. And I
Right.
just want to be there.
Amen.
Okay, so because this is a biography, this isn't our normal format. Obviously, we're not going to go through everything beat by beat because we want all of you to buy this book and read it for yourself because Abby does a fantastic job. This is a little over 400 pages.
Yeah,
We got
right
an
around
advance
400,
copy,
yeah.
so I don't know if that'll change, but this book feels like 800 pages. There's so much information in it. And if you're the kind of person who wants to know that behind the scenes stuff, wants to see how the sausage is made, just wants all of that cool, juicy information, definitely pick this up, which I guess is kind of accidentally a rating, but I should ask first, is there anything else you guys wanted to talk about Mick's work or this book?
Oh yes, I want to, As someone who watched a whole lot of movies for this, I do want to recommend his newest movie. It came out in 2018. It's a Shudder exclusive. It's called Nightmare Cinema. It is an anthology series, and much like Masters of Horror, each short is directed. Mick Garris directs one. Joe Dante directs a very good twist on a slasher story. I forget his name. I want to say David Slade. He directed 30 Days of Night.
30 Days of Night is great.
It's a really good movie. He has a short in it that is sincerely distressing about a woman slowly losing her mind, and without giving anything away, it's just very, very, very upsetting. And then at the end, Mick Garris directs a segment called Dead that is just a fucking solid ghost story about a kid that dies for a minute and comes back and what happens to him. Oh, man.
I want to watch that so badly. That anthologies, not enough of them.
It is, exactly. It is a solid movie. Some of the effects are amazing. Really cool, and I'd never heard of it. So everyone, if you need something to watch, check it out. Also, Fuzz Bucket.
The last thought I want to say involves the last two chapters of this book. One of the things that Abby talks about in the foreword is that the people she interviewed for this book couldn't talk about how much they love Mick Garris enough, which is a testament itself. But at the very end of the book, there's a nice chapter that's basically everybody that's been interviewed getting a chance to say another nice thing about him. And then the last chapter wraps up with him kind of writing back to the reader. I struggle sometimes to read biographies in nonfiction because I know where it ends most of the time. It's I know where the journey ends. So it was just it felt really nice to wrap up a biography in such a heartfelt way. It just made me happy at the end of it.
I'm sorry, I'm chuckling because you just said nice a lot. And it makes me, this book is so like Midwest, like kind. It's like, well, thank you. Well, no, thank you. Well, thank you for thanking me for
absolutely.
Thanking you. It's beautiful.
It's crazy that having not read the book, just from his movies, largely horror movies, it's crazy that comes through. It is work. It's even when it's like a violent, anything. Even when a ball of critters eats a guy's back, you're just like, this is a good time.
Yeah, you can feel that coming through all of his work. Another thing I want to give him a shout out real quick because they do address the fact that there are no lady masters of horror, and it's not for lack of trying. And they did approach a few female directors, and scheduling didn't work out, or they didn't want to be placed in that horror box, and a lot of male directors that they approached too who are not involved also were concerned about being placed in that horror box. And I just have to say that baffles me because I wish I was placed in a horror box. Like, what a place to be, especially if there are people like this and the people he works with and the people who take the time to shed more light on his work, like Abby. If these are the individuals in this community, like, absolutely, yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Put me in the box and lock it.
It's our people. Horror people are just rad.
All right, let's wrap it up with a rating. I think you can tell by how much we really enjoyed it and have had fun sharing these fun facts we discovered that it's a real good read. I highly recommend. 5 out of 5 blue chambray shirts. CM?
Also, gonna give it 5 out of 5 blue chambray shirts. Pick it up.
For sure. Fuzz Bucket is heartfelt. It teaches a really good lesson about believing in yourself and listening to your friends. And it gave me nightmares because he's a little chubby rat man. 5 out of 5 blue chambray shirts.
That's it for this episode of Derry Public Radio. As always, thank you for listening. Join us for our next episode. For Benjamin Graham and CM Alexander, this is Joshua Kahn reminding you, you have to have the hide of a rhinoceros to do work that's intended for public consumption.
Hey everyone, CM Alexander here. Thank you for listening to our chat about Master of Horror, the official biography of Mick Garris by Abby Bernstein. Abby did a great job. This is a fantastic read. Thank you again to Natalie at ATB Publishing for reaching out to us. We also have a written review on our website, constantreaders.org. The book comes out on August 13th, but if you don't want to wait, you can pre-order your copy from atbpublishing.com. I did, even though I technically have a digital copy. We all know I can't help myself. Instead of telling you how to find us like I usually do, find this book instead. Show Abby some love. Show Abby some love and show Mick and the horror community some love by grabbing your copy. That's all for now, listeners. Goodbye.